Um, Welcome everyone to our fourth meeting of the Private Passenger Automobile Insurance Affordability Work Group. I hope everyone had a wonderful Thanksgiving. Have a busy month ahead. The report of this work group is due to the General Assembly January 1st. And so I know that you just received a draft yesterday morning to our work group members. Our hope is to walk through today. First of all, we're going to talk a little bit about the excess profits in the information that we've been able to gather from other states, and just take the temperature of our work group members on that question. I think from there, we're going to walk through how we characterized. Welcome, Marceline. I'm just giving a little bit of run a show for today. So we're going to talk about excess profits first and just take the temperature of the work group members on how we want to talk about that in the report in terms of recommendations. We're going to go from there and walk through the language and how we've characterized recommendations. I think in a lot of places where there's not consensus, you'll see hopefully presentations of different views so that we're capturing that, but we're not necessarily making a formal recommendation at this time. So any questions? And then I think Katie sent around, but we're asking for feedback on the report and changes requested by December 10th. So today is not the last day. You can get that to us in writing. December 10th would be great. As we move through, if there are places where folks are really finding things sticky, then we can talk about that. But our thought right now is December 10th. So we did, and I'll talk a little bit more after we talk about excess profits. We did get 4 letters that have been shared with the work group members, as well as posted on the website of the work group. Let me pause there and see if any of my team has anything that I missed. Any questions before we jump in? Okay. So first, I wanted to highlight the excess profits language. And Craig, I don't know if you're able to share the report on screen.
Can you see it?
Yeah, that's great. So all the way to the second to last page. We had a few questions. I will say that Katie Callahan from our team, and I'll invite her to chime in if she would like. We couldn't find any evidence that any of the states that have excess profit laws on the books had utilized them in recent years, except for the state of Florida. And that was within the past couple of years. I think they announced an investigation. They announced a press release earlier this year, specifically about Progressive. But other than that, I think there's states that conduct an analysis, but we haven't seen evidence of taking action. So I'm going to pause there and see if anyone knows differently, but that was the research to the best of our ability on that topic. Go ahead, Nancy.
Yeah, I agree. We checked and we could not find any incidents of any other state having a refund. And as you have pointed out in the report, this was the result of some large tort reform that took place in the state. And they saw immediate impact on the auto and homeowner market. I think I had provided some information about how many new companies came into the marketplace, as well as utilizing this statute, which I think has been on the books for some time. And I was trying to find exactly when it was enacted, but it's been there a really long time. And no one on our staff could recall any time where that's been utilized in any other state.
Thanks, Nancy. Any other questions or comments or thoughts on this topic? How do folks feel about including a recommendation on a statute to address excess profits?
Well, on behalf of APCIA and the industry, we don't think it's really necessary. As you had shown in your presentation, there's only been a small profit that has been received by the private passenger auto group in the state of Maryland over the last 10 years. And as you can see, these statutes in other states just create a lot of paperwork for their insurers in the state, and it has not really been utilized. So I just don't think it's necessary to enact legislation when we haven't had an issue here in the state.
Thanks, Nancy. Anyone else have thoughts on this one?
I would just add that my experience is that excess profits are returned in reduced rates. So, you know, as we've been through 3 or 4 years of increasing rates, we've reached a peak, and they're starting to go down. And I'm aware of multiple carriers that have filed for rate decreases in the next year. So I agree with Nancy.
Marceline? Oh, you're talking on mute, sorry.
Taking the opposite view, I certainly think it makes sense to do something around excess profits. Again, as the producer's saying, if it's not an issue, there shouldn't be any problem with having this on the books. It sounds like it's something that's a tool for the regulators to use when there are excess profits, and that we could use should that be an issue. I'm certainly gratified to hear that rates are coming down, because I will say from the work we've been doing in communities, people are finding the auto insurance rates unsustainable. And folks we've talked to in workforce development programs are simply saying that they can't afford to take jobs that they could be hired for because they can't afford the insurance. So I think looking at excess profits and having another tool for the commissioner to use is worth it. And luckily, we have a semi-competitive market, and the producers have the capacity to administer some additional paperwork. So I think it's worth us pursuing.
Thanks, Marceline.
Commissioner?
Yeah.
So I said I probably would not speak, so that didn't last long.
11 minutes, sir.
My comment is, let's take away the debate of the issue itself and look at it through a political prism. My concern is that especially this being an election year, if we throw excess profits into the report, there are going to be some folks that are going to latch on to that, run around screaming about the profit mongering insurance companies, and ignore some of the underlying reasons that car insurance is unaffordable.
Yeah, that's a great point, Al. Senator Gile, I don't want to put you on the spot, but wondering if you have any thoughts here.
Sorry, I'm in the car right now, so nothing right now.
Okay. So to Al's point, I just want to throw out here as an option is we have reporting, right? I think we were able to put together numbers on profitability. I think we can certainly be transparent about that reporting on an annual basis. Is that, how do folks feel about that? Is that something we could get consensus around?
So you would be doing a report to the General Assembly on an annual basis of the 10-year profits of the private passenger auto?
Yes.
I think that I don't see where that would be a problem. It would be on record. I know you had a lot of reports that you were doing before, and now you get to get a new one that's not health related. So
Yeah, I love that. So I think what I'm hearing is, and we can write this up, is that we have some consensus around being more transparent about 10-year profitability reports and doing an annual report to the General Assembly. I think what I'm hearing is, and where we need to note some opposing viewpoints, is not consensus around regulatory tools, but then I think we can talk about some of the pros and cons that we've had in this discussion.
And Commissioner, I guess my question is with the reporting on the 10-year profitability, would that just go to the General Assembly, or would that also be available on your website so that it's publicly available?
Yeah, I think it would be available on our website publicly
Okay.
as well. Yeah.
Okay, great.
All of our reports are public, but I think just this is a personal aside. I'm committed to making more of our data transparent where we can. And so I think this is a really important topic, and we would want to make sure that it's out there along
That's
with
great.
other drivers. Yep.
Okay.
Mike, are you there?
I agree with that. That sounds good. I would just add that I think the governor spoke at the Board of Trade a week or 3 ago.
Yeah.
And he mentioned that one of his goals is to make our economy more competitive for business.
Yeah.
Instead of relying on the federal government. And I think when I know this is totally different, but when you put something in about profits into the legislature, it sends the wrong message to the overall business community. So I think the idea of a report is more than fair and transparent.
Okay. Great. Thanks, Mike. That's helpful. Okay, this is great. Any other comments on this? So we'll send that right up. Again, consensus around reporting, not consensus around regulatory tools.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, Craig, can we go? So I think our next agenda item, well, we go to the top of the report, is we did get 4 letters of written feedback prior to the release of the draft report. So I think all of the work group members should have those. They are on our website. Our thought was that we should include all written feedback received as an appendix to the report. So I think we've tried to weave through some of, frankly, all of the views as concisely as we could throughout the report, but then to not lose the substance, to include it as an appendix. So that's first. I just wanted to see if there's any thoughts on that approach.
I would agree. I like when the reports have the feedback that are attached in the appendix.
I agree.
And I guess one thing I wanted to ask is that when we send in our changes or whatever thoughts on the report, will they go into the appendix? Or I guess I know Marceline will probably maybe send some additional thoughts. I mean, knowing that we agree on so many things. And so I'm just wondering if, like, will they be in the appendix, or are some changes that I think you know where I'm going with this, so.
Yeah, yeah. So I think so this is where I think maybe if we can go through at least what we have now and then talk about that at the end, Nancy, if that's okay, because I think I want to make sure that we incorporate folks' feedback. I just also, and that folks have a time to see that feedback, and that we're transparent about that feedback. But I also am sensitive to my team's time in terms of making sure that we get this report on time as we can. So if we can kind of take a walk through and then talk about how we handle that, I think that would be great. My maybe as we start to walk through, I will say that we, in the structure of this report, we haven't done an executive summary yet. That will come at the end once we're comfortable with sort of that recommendation language. And the thought is that we would pull up specific recommendations so that they are easy to flip through in the executive summary. But how we tried to structure this was to keep everything fairly factual, to give a broad overview of our discussions and some of the different ideas raised, and then had specific sections about discussions about what we talked about and the different views that we heard. So if you can start scrolling, Craig. So our first section was defining affordability. We went through the FIO affordability index, if you can continue scrolling. We went through the Insurance Research Council's affordability index and description. And then here is our recommendation summary, and would want to make sure folks are comfortable with this. I think we talked about the FIO definition being a reasonable conceptual framework for monitoring and evaluating trends over time. We talked about not endorsing either definition for inclusion in legislation to establish a literal affordability threshold. We heard some concerns about how doing so would inhibit rating. We talked about complications around the meaningful evaluation of the affordability of auto insurance over time and the different things that go into auto insurance. And we also talked about periodically reporting, again, transparency wise, on that FIO definition of affordability.
And as I mentioned, I know my team hasn't really gone through line by line, and I appreciate that we have some additional time to look at it. So,
yeah. Any other thoughts about this language? Okay, we can move on. So I think our next section talks about trends in premium rate increases. Again, I think summarizing much of the information that was presented to you all. We shared the same information about sort of the range of indicated rates over time. We talked about many of the factors that contribute to premium rate increases. If you can continue scrolling, Craig. I think pretty much everything we do have a significant discussion of liability and some of the dynamics in Maryland as well as nationally. Talked about all the sort of inputs: auto repair costs, electric vehicle uptake, increased severity of weather events, towing, minimum bodily injury liability requirements, driver's license requirements and tariffs. Let's pause there for just a second. Yeah, because I think Nancy shared with us some information on states and driving laws in places where maybe we have opportunities to improve.
Thank you. Marceline, I don't know if you got to look at that report or not, but on that there, what it does is it's from a group of advocates for highway safety and ways to lower crash data, injuries, et cetera. And so they went going through and they've rated the laws in a lot of different states. And it just happens that it came out yesterday, and I got a copy this morning. And what was interesting is that it actually talked about our driver licensing laws right there. So I didn't know if you maybe wanted to add that to the footnote or whatever. It's just different things about, letting passengers in the car at certain ages. That was one of the recommendations. And supervised driving, so having a parent in the car for maybe 70 hours instead of 60 hours. That's just another thing to add into that report. One of the things that that we were talking about was that it also talked about something that we didn't discuss, which was backseat seatbelt laws. And we never thought of that. And I just thought, oh my goodness, here comes a subject we didn't even discuss. So I don't know if the work group wanted to consider that in a little section, or just your thoughts on that. Because we all know how important front seat passenger laws are, and maybe adding in the backseat seatbelt laws could reduce injuries in an auto accident. So just put that thought out to the group.
Thanks so much, Nancy, and I appreciate you sharing it this morning. I haven't had time to look at it. It's often really hard for me to look at something, to have the time to look at something before, when I get it that day. So
I
I'd love
agree.
to take it back to folks and talk a little bit more about it. Because I haven't really had time to read it or digest it. So it might be premature to put it in now, but I'm happy to have a conversation about what this would look like.
So I just, how would you want to handle that? Do you want us to express our opinion about it by the 10th? Want something like that?
I think that would be great.
Yeah.
I think if you could just express your opinion. I think Marceline, if your folks have an opinion about that, and also any other members of the work group, that'd be great. My thought is, since we didn't fully discuss it, we can include it as a footnote or another or add a brief sentence about this being a source that describes other improvements that Maryland could make to its traffic laws that may help.
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it. And like I said, it was really issued yesterday, and I didn't even know about it. So I was like, yeah, great. This is like enforcing something that we already talked about for the driver's license. So thank you very much.
I would just add, and this is really a discussion for another day, but the technology exists to, and I'm not a big fan of, some of the telemetrics and the things we put in vehicles, but the technology exists that we could require that young drivers are tracked for a year or 2 years, and it would make a huge difference. By tracked, I mean, you put an app on their phone and it tracks their speed and hard stopping. And while it might not sound like a great idea to some people, it would make a huge difference in the long run to require people to track young drivers, as opposed to raising the age. And then, if you're good for a year, it comes off, or 18 months, but the technology's there.
That's a thought. Should we include that in the study that we were talking about?
I think it's a great topic for another day. I think, from a consumer protection standpoint, we have a lot of concerns about data and about data privacy that, that telematics raises. And I'm not saying that I believe telematics can be a good tool in some cases, but sort of a blanket recommendation, I think would need a lot more discussion and further study because there are a lot of real privacy concerns in terms of data protection and how that's used and if it's sold or not sold and a lot of other things that would go along with that we would want to probably discuss at another time.
Well, maybe let's just hold that thought for 2 seconds. And if we can continue scrolling. We did discuss a little bit of what we heard about reinsurance and some of the information we got there. We had been asked by a legislator to take a specific look at reinsurance. I think what we heard was it's not really a dynamic in pricing in private passenger auto. And so we have a little bit of information about that. And then we get into, I think, the recommendations. I think the first thing we talked about was recommending further study into the feasibility of updating the DPSCS system during traffic stops because those things aren't connected at this point. So again, I don't think we're recommending doing it, just looking into it further. And the other thing that we're looking into, and perhaps, I'm almost hearing like some broader information about traffic laws, as well as like young driver behaviors. I think we talked about looking into further driver's license eligibility requirements and professional license restrictions. And that any study should also consider like the converse, like any further requirements that if we have more burdensome licensure, that those could have unintended consequences on economic opportunity and quality of life.
We had some questions at this first paragraph.
Okay.
And I can put it in the chat if you'd like.
Yeah.
It's this section of the report. It's at the bottom of 11. Craig, could you scroll up just a little bit? I think it's, no, the other way. I'm sorry. Scroll down. Right there. Stop. Go back. It's that last paragraph on 13. No. That there are limitations on the extent to which actions can mitigate certain factors. The work group also acknowledges that in certain the public benefit may.
I think that's our next section.
Okay.
If that's, yeah.
So it's just one of the sentences in that opening paragraph under 5.
Okay. Yeah, if we're, so I think we've talked about the language here. We talked about some potential changes that I think Nancy and Marceline and would encourage others. It doesn't need to be limited to Nancy and Marceline. And then I think Mike, you had a concept bringing up as well. So if we have a few sentences that we want to add or modify there, let me know. But is there anything we haven't talked about here that we want in this section? And we can keep moving, and if folks want to come back, that's fine. Okay, so now we're into policy options to increase transparency and affordability. This is something that really gets into we get into a lot of pretty heavy non-consensus topics in this section. But Nancy, you said your folks had a question even about the first paragraph. Can you talk about that a little more?
Yeah, and I'm trying to send my comment. Why is it not going? Let me see. I'm sorry, I'm having a difficult time sending a different language. Okay. excuse me 1 second, let me get back up here. So I'll just say it. It was the sentence that this section of the report outlines relative positions of current Maryland law and identifies policy interventions that may increase transparency surrounding and enhance the affordability of private passenger insurance premium rates in Maryland. This section discusses changes to competitive rating, expense loading, restricting the use of non-driving factors. So this introductory sentence can be read to suggest that the work group found that these measures had the potential to improve affordability and transparency. But much later on, the draft says that no consensus was reached on these things, but the sentences in the introduction could easily be read out of context. So that to say that the work group found that these things may help to address affordability. So we were only going to suggest a different change to the language. This section of the report outlines policy interventions that were presented to the work group as potential ways to increase transparency surrounding and enhance the affordability of private passenger insurance premium rates in Maryland. And we would also like to add a sentence, however, as discussed in subsection A.5 of this section, the work group did not reach consensus on whether these interventions have the potential to improve transparency or affordability of private passenger auto. So I apologize, I'm having trouble putting this in the chat feature, which is kind of silly, but I had to make everything bigger because I'm having problems with my eyes. And I think that's one of the problems, so. Maybe you know what, I'll send it to Kate, and then maybe she can put it in the chat feature since I apologize.
Okay, yeah, that's great. Okay, well, maybe we can come back to that when it's in there. Craig, can you keep scrolling? I think it is fair that we have a lot in here where we didn't have a consensus on. So there's a description of the different types of rating for auto. If you can keep scrolling, we have some of Maryland's history. Here we talk about sort of different views of competitive rating. I will note in here, you know, I think we had a little bit of a back and forth about how we view our market. We do produce a report. We published it in May of 25. Which found that our market is moderately concentrated. Although, again, because of the number of competitors and a relatively low market share for Maryland Auto, we do find our market to be competitive. We talk about what some of the other states have been doing. There are a couple of laws, I think, that passed recently, and a couple of laws. One law didn't pass. One law is pending, and I think we refer to those. We talk about there being a risk, and we refer to an IRC study that was provided. If you can keep scrolling. So let me pause there because that's a pretty meaty section, and see if anyone had any comments or concerns about any of the framing of some of this information that we went through.
I guess one thing that wasn't really discussed, and I'd mentioned it on the last call, you know, we had referenced, you know, prior approval, and I had mentioned that there might be a problem in states where that exists. And I had mentioned during COVID in California, and I said that I would talk about that a little bit more this time. And it was during the pandemic. California insurers provided $2.4 billion in premium refunds because of the diminished habits, which Maryland did as well. As reported in the media at the time, some insurers saw little choice to restrict new business. That was because as the drivers returned to the roads, cost increase. Yet, in spite of the data demonstrating that there was an increase in a rising cost, not a single auto rating plan was approved for 2.5 years. And that's some of the concerns that we have when you're in a state that can hold a rate and not approve it. And then we're having an impact where then insurers saw no choice but to restrict writing new business in the states. And they terminated agency appointments and limited policy submissions. And while very few completely exited the market, they became highly selective about renewals. So I just want that to be aware that there is things about prior approval that makes carriers worry, because that's the thing. Without your approval, we can't move forward. So it's just a thought.
I think Marceline came off mute, but I do want to note that we have a pretty substantial discussion here, the IRC study, and maybe not a reference to California, but I think of potential drawbacks to prior approval.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think one thing, and again, I have not been able to read this closely. It's just been one of those weeks. So I apologize.
We didn't give a lot of time. It's totally okay.
Yeah, I apologize if I missed it. But I do think at one of the work groups, we did talk a lot about the Washington, D.C. study and the kind of the black-white premium gap. And I don't know if that's reflected in here as well, because I think that does sort of reflect on some of the concerns about some of the non-driving factors as well as the territorial ratings. And so if it's not here or referenced, I definitely think we should find a place to include it. And I know Nancy served on that committee and was involved in that, but I think it's important new sort of study and set of information that we should at least reference somewhere in the report if it's not already there.
Yeah, I don't think it is specifically called out in the report, Marceline. So I think that
Yeah, and that would be great. We can provide some information. It has an executive summary, but it was pretty clear that they did a overview. DC is looked at different races and the propensity for accidents and losses, and then looked at the premiums that were charged. And what they found as a conclusion is that certain race groups had much higher losses than other rate groups, and yet their premiums were a little bit lower than what they should have been charged based on their losses. So they were concerned, the department is concerned to determine why are they having a lot more accidents and losses than other races, and try to find ways to trying to make it so that they can look at solutions to find out ways to make that closer. They don't think there's going to be an overall solution. So right now they're looking at different sections of DC that where high rates of accidents occur and things that they could do. And they're going to be doing another data study. So it's a pretty detailed report. It's unintentional bias, and we can get you a copy of it, obviously, and Marceline's pretty well aware of it.
No, I've read it. And I think one of the things that I found particularly striking is that even taking into account accidents and liability and other factors, there still remained a gap. And I think that's particularly important when you talk about the unintentional bias piece, is that they noted that if you're doing multifactorial analysis and you're looking at these factors regardless. In addition, there's still this gap. And so I think it both speaks to your point and this broader point that I'm talking about around an unintentional bias. So again, I just think it's a deeply data-driven study. It's a neighboring place. It's worthwhile, again, mentioning, especially when we're talking about further study.
Okay, so I think this is great. If we can keep so a couple of things, I think, because or I think we'll probably have a few comments throughout the discussion too, so I don't want to lose what we just had. And I know Katie's taking notes. So I think the first thing is, Nancy, you're going to offer some potential language in that lead-in paragraph to make sure
And I sent it, thank you.
language is neutral, and then we'll send that around. I think, and we can put a pin on this, maybe, but what I'm hearing about the DC study is we might actually want to include it in the recommendations section as a look that another state has done, very data-driven look, and something that Maryland could potentially look into as a study we should take of our auto market. So Nancy's making, I'm not sure if Nancy is quite there.
Yeah, it was a lot of data that had to be provided by insurance companies. And at the end of the day, they found that our rates were actually justified based on the losses. So it was a lot of cost to provide. And then when the end of the day, it reflected that we were charging premiums that reflected losses. So.
Okay, so as we go through this, let's think about how we can incorporate the look DC did, and if we want to do something similar, and we just may not have consensus around that, we can also just talk about the DC study and talk about differing views about whether Maryland should do a similar look. So, okay, can we keep, so the next portion of this section was options for limiting expense loading. I think we do describe a couple of states that have laws on the books. I think California's may have been longer term. Louisiana has a recent one. If you can continue scrolling down, but there's specific expenses that can't go into rates. So we describe those. Then we move into non-driving factors. We give an overview of some of the exclusions of, sorry, Craig, can you scroll up a little bit? My brain doesn't work that fast. I can't remember all of it. We describe some states that have banned the use of looking at non-driving rating factors: California, Hawaii, Massachusetts, Michigan, North Carolina. A PPA rating can't be based on age and gender. New York, PPA insurers can't use occupational status or educational level as rating factors unless there's a demonstration to the satisfaction of the that's the name for their insurance commissioner, that the use of these factors doesn't result in rates that are unfairly discriminatory. So we talked about those, and then we get into detail in a couple of areas that we talked about more specifically. We talked about credit history and the compromise that was reached some years ago about how credit is used in Maryland in PPA insurance rating. And then we talk about some other approaches in different states. We did add a description of the Fair Medical Debt Reporting Act and how that could have an impact positively for Marylanders. We talked about territorial rating.
I had one
Yeah.
question for you.
Go ahead.
I noticed that nothing was put in there about Washington State trying to ban the use of credit. And we had provided some data about that. That Washington State, we had 3 states that banned the use of credit, or I'm not exactly sure, but that actually outright banned the use of credit. And then Washington State had tried to pass legislation to ban the use of credit, and it failed. And the insurance department tried to do it by regulation. And so companies were told that they had to stop using credit, and it had a very disruptive reaction to the marketplace. And then the courts found that the insurance commissioner had exceeded his authority to pass this by regulation. But we had provided some data about its impact on the rates. And so you might want to look at that and include it.
Okay.
And I really want to thank Katie for all of her work on the report. It's a lot to cover and take in and try to synthesize. And so I'm really grateful for the work MIA's done, and especially Katie on this. I think, from my perspective, we also provided a lot of information about the success of the California program and a deeper dive into some of these other non-driving rating factors, including some of our studies. And I guess where I land is if it's an area where we don't have consensus, we can just, do kind of a very basic factual reporting about this is what this group did, and this is what this state did, this is what this state did. Just in the interest of like keeping the report as tight as possible. I mean,
Yeah, I agree with you, Marceline. This was just that it was actually where something actually was banned,
right.
and it had an impact where the
Right.
insurers had to remove credit. So I just
No,
think
I understand. And like,
just
but we have a
because
report,
we have
a
things
report on
about-
territorial ratings that's data driven too. And I think all of those things could be appendices or links, but maybe not everything needs to go in the report.
Yeah, I agree. But we had a whole section about legislation that failed, about moving to prior approval. So I thought, since it was recent legislation or an impact where, we keep talking about what happens if credit was banned. We're not at the same position, I know that, but this was an example where credit was actually banned and had an impact. So just so that it should be mentioned.
I think maybe to Marceline's point, this is definitely an area where I think we could go down some data rabbit holes pretty easily, which is totally fine. But if we haven't really fleshed it out as a work group, I think I am more comfortable with it in an appendix. I think, I know Nancy, you mentioned some of that data and provided follow-up. We can definitely make sure it's in an appendix. I know Marceline's comments and follow-up would be in an appendix. My guess, because and we can continue to walk through and see if folks change their mind, but I think there may be other places where there's sort of countervailing data. I think we really did our best to accomplish what we talked about together. And we do want to make sure that information provided is included as well, so.
Yeah, and just that, this is the only example where credit was banned. And that's something where, we may dispute something that happens, better or good, but it actually occurred. And I think it is something that should be mentioned in the report. There actually was a state that banned it for a short period of time. So.
Yeah, I think, okay. Well, if you could send your write-up around and maybe the exact language we want to include, I think to that point, Marceline, I think I would recommend that you do the same about some of the experts you think it should be highlighted. I think they should only be a paragraph or less in each case. And
Not a
that would be
problem.
my
Thank you so much.
recommendation, and then we can see where we land.
Perfect.
Okay. Territorial rating. So let me pause there because I feel like other work group members have been quiet. So I just, Senator Guile, Mike, Al, please feel free to chime in as we move along. These are really important topics. Okay. The next section is territorial rating. I think we talked a lot about what territorial rating is, how it is done, some of our current requirements on Maryland law. We talked about some state, and again, no state completely bans the use of it, but several do limit how the practice can be applied. California has some pretty specific considerations. Connecticut also has some considerations and mixing of the individual territorial loss cost indication as well as 25% of the statewide average loss cost. So I think they're able to moderate the impact of territorial rating on urban areas of Connecticut. They also subject changes to territorial classifications to prior approval. We talk about Michigan and New Jersey requirements as well. New Jersey obviously gets into some pretty specific requirements here. There's a pretty substantial list. Can we keep scrolling? Okay, let me pause there. That was the description of territorial rating. See if there are any questions. Okay. Our next section, we talked about state-sponsored no-cost and low-cost auto insurance programs. We had a description of Hawaii, New Jersey, and the California program. And so each of the states have programs that are administered by the state's assigned risk plan. We talked about Hawaii's program for low-income individuals, New Jersey's program, which is limited to medical coverage only policies, and it's tied to Medicaid enrollment. And then California's program. Okay. Any questions there before we move on to? There was not a lot of consensus in this section. So we tried to outline that here about our discussions. I think we talked about, we had a difference of opinion about legislation that would transition Maryland to either prior approval, flex rating, or legislation that gives us more time to review a filed rate. And we talked about some of those different views. We talked about a lack of consensus around expense loading. We talked about a lack of consensus over addressing the use of credit in the initial application. We talked about a lack of consensus on territorial rating. I think we had a pretty robust discussion about that, or changes to how we do that. Where we did have consensus was looking at a further study into whether and how we could do an equitable and sustainable low-cost auto program in Maryland. And we list out some of the evaluations we talked about here. Okay. Craig, can you scroll back up? That recommendation. Okay. Let me pause there and see if there are any questions or comments.
Yeah, Commissioner?
Yeah, go ahead, Al.
Yeah, I've got two things. Naturally, if we do look at any kind of a low-cost plan, I think it makes sense for Maryland Auto to be the mechanism to administer it. Obviously, we already have the infrastructure in place, and using Maryland jobs as opposed to non-Maryland jobs, I think makes sense. Also, we're not quite there yet, but in the topic about the a subsidy program, there was a reference that that would not be following, and I don't have it in front of me. I think the term was rating principle, and I would like to make the point that if a carrier charges the full gross premium that is actuarially based, and then has part of it subsidized by any mechanism, much like happens in the health space today, then it would be following the rate making principle. And that was it. Thank you.
Thanks, Al.
I definitely support a study, and I definitely think looking at, how it's administered and who administers it is important, as well as looking at subsidies or other options to make sure that it's self-sustaining. Um, I have preferences, but I think what makes sense right now is to agree that MIA will do the study and talk to all the people who run low-cost programs, and as that goes forward, we can talk more as that study is underway.
Yeah, we agree. We think looking at combining the section later on with that you talk about the program through MAIF that was talking about some sort of credit, and then talking about maybe a subsidy to certain drivers based on their income, so that they can purchase auto insurance. I think that's just great ideas to bounce around to figure out a way that those people can afford to purchase a policy. So, we've been in agreement, and Marceline and I have sat at the table on low cost auto before. So it would be good to at least get something looked at, and instead of what happened before was legislation was put in and there wasn't any study to base it on. And it would be great to have a whole background on different options that the state could take to put those drivers into a vehicle.
Thanks, Nancy. Thanks, Marceline. And thanks, Al. Any other comments on this section? I think that if there are tweaks to this section, I know we'll continue to going through things we want to move over to this, then please do follow up with any changes you may have. Okay. Craig, can you scroll again? Okay, so I think and we talked about some of this at the top of our call, but policy options around premiums and transparency. So we talked some about we give our Maryland law about disclosure to consumers and our current rating framework. Can you continue scrolling, Craig? Again, we talk about some of our clarifications that we've issued recently around Maryland law and our transparency requirements and how those interact with telematics programs that our carriers are using. If you can continue scrolling. We do have informational resources and a consumer guide to auto insurance that we update every year. Continue scrolling. And then we talked about potential additional disclosure requirements. We talked about the NEIC's Consumer Information Working Group recommendations, some of which are in line with Maryland law, some of which go beyond our current Maryland law. We talked about considerations relating to telematics. I think Mike and Marceline, some of the dialogue you had earlier really summed up well. I think there's a lot of promise, right, in telematics and its ability to accurately measure risk. The flip side of that is, I think it's wanting to make sure that telematics programs have proper governance, oversight, and are updated to ensure that they continue to update risk. We do have some complaints data we include here. Nancy, you look like you want to jump in with something.
Yeah, I just, the way that, and I'm sorry, I got it, and this is small. Let me see if I can get it bigger. Let me see if I can find that page. That's right after telematic. Okay. I understand that we're talking about telematics, and I just thought that the way it was drafted, it sort of didn't discuss the benefits of what telematics does, that you have real-time action to help improve your driving behavior. Also, when you were looking at the market conduct report that you issued, you were talking about the renewals of an insured. So what's not discussed is that people that enrolled initially in a telematics program did so because they thought and assumed they were saving money from their prior carrier. So you would assume that the initial policy, they were saving money. So what is not talked about is that the initial policy was someone enrolling in telematics, assuming they were saving money. And then when their policy renewal came, that that was left out was the data of 31.6% saw a rate decrease on their renewal, 45.24 had no change, and 23.6% had an increase. And in addition, it said about the data that they had 811 complaints between 2024 and June 2025. According to your report, you had, let's see, how many policies are in that program? 303, 845,000 policies were issued in 2023 that were telematics. So when you look at the complaint data and compare it to the number of policies, it's really less than 0.02% of the total policies that are out there for telematics. So it just feels that, you know, you need to make it more neutral in the way it's being described, because it seems to me that it's driving towards certain things. For example, a wide range of driving behaviors, and then you chose 2. Well, in your report, I think you had a list of like 20 factors that are used in telematics, and I think it should say, see the footnote below, these are the telematics factors that are being used, instead of cherry picking 2. I just think that, you know, when you have that many to choose one out of the whole list, you know, you should provide a total overview. So that's my comments on that, and we will submit comments about that as well.
Okay, thank you, Nancy. Any other thoughts on this section? So I think if there's specific language that your members want to see here.
Yeah, we'll definitely
just
send that
let
in.
us know. Yeah. Okay. Craig, can you keep scrolling? So here was our recommendations. I will say this is, if you'll recall at our last meeting, this is where we stopped. I think I said, I can imagine how folks might come out. So this is our stab at that discussion. And so I want to invite a really close look on some of these things. So I think we listed that we are unable to come to consensus on additional premium transparency requirements. We talk about the NAIC and some of the back and forth there. We also say that we were unable to agree on whether legislative action should be taken to establish disclosure requirements and appeals processes for telematics programs, and have some of the pros and cons here. So I think, Nancy, as you're working on the first part of it, let's keep in mind the description here too.
That's fine, thank you. And we had a whole section about the NAIC transparency thing, because it appears that maybe 1 or 2 states, and no one has adopted it in its full. And as you already laid out pretty substantially is that Maryland has one of the more substantial renewal requirements for premium increases than most states. So.
All right, great. Any other reactions or comments from work group members on this section? And again, we'll take comments through the 10th, so. Okay. The next section is methodologies by which affordability can be considered in rate making. And this is a lot of, into Al's point, into I think the other discussion where we talk about the Maryland Auto Affordability Index, if you can keep scrolling. We talk about our order, about phasing out the use of the affordability index, and the reasons why. Okay. And we also had an amendment to that order. Okay. Keep scrolling, Craig. During the course of our work group's work, Maryland Auto presented two options for reducing rate shock as the affordability index is phased out. One was to reduce or allow Maryland Auto to adjust the length of policy terms from 12 to 6 months, which I think, and Al, you're on the phone, I don't think we need a statutory change to make that.
Okay, thank you. Either did we, but thanks.
That's our read. The second option was that subsidy program, that economic relief credit program. And I think if what I'm hearing from everyone, unless folks feel differently, is that we want to move some of that discussion to the recommendation around looking at a low-cost auto program, and this being something there. So I think we can accomplish that in the drafting. I'm talking out loud for Katie, but go ahead, Marceline.
I do that by reference currently. I can try to reorganize the report if people would prefer.
I mean, I guess I'll do a closer look and, on both sections, but I don't want to, I guess I would hate for the study to sort of presuppose where we were going. If we want to incorporate it in both places as options, that's fine. I just don't want to be deterministic in terms of the low cost study.
Yeah.
Or overly prescriptive.
Okay. Well, I think maybe this is an area too, we don't have to settle on this if folks can have specific recommendations and reactions. If we can send that around, that would be great. If we can keep scrolling. Oh, Nancy, you came on camera.
No, I just, I had to jump off for a second.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right. Okay. If you can scroll up a little bit, Craig, sorry. So we did have, in terms of our work group and discussion and recommendations, I think we all had consensus on the idea of allowing Maryland Auto to adjust the lengths of their policy terms from 12 to 6 months. We did recommend just an impact look of that for Maryland consumers. So we had consensus there. The second, and again, I think we've talked about this a little bit already, is the economic relief credit program based on income. This would require legislative action. Again, I think if folks have thoughts on how we make sure that this look is tied, we did talk about recommending further study into whether and how we could accomplish this. Any Any further thoughts there? Al, I know you're driving. Hate to put you on the spot, but
No other comments from me, other than the fact, as I mentioned yesterday, or last time, we can chat about it offline, is I have concerns about abandoning affordability in total while we're still doing studies.
yep. Okay. All right. So the next section, and this gives an overview of our discussion about profitability in private passenger auto. If you can keep scrolling. So we include a lot of definitions, and then the charts that we took a look at when we reviewed this. So we had, okay, keep scrolling. So we had nationwide looks, and then we had Maryland specific looks. And I think our general finding was that there was a pretty modest underwriting profit overall, nationally and in Maryland. So we then described legislation that came in the 2025 session about some parameters around any line of PNC insurance. And you can keep scrolling. I think we describe our letter of information about some of the concerns or questions, I should say, about doing that across all lines. And so that resulted in asking us to take a look as part of this work. So we do, and as we talked about at the top of the meeting, there's a handful of states that do require a look at excess profits and some specific reporting. I think each state does it a little bit differently. There's not a uniform approach here. And as we talked about, only one state has acted recently on the information that they're getting in terms of refunds to consumers. So we talked at the top, our team is going to work together to do a write-up of where we had consensus around some additional reporting and transparency, and then where we didn't have consensus, and the pros and cons of having such a statute on the books. Any questions there? Or any thoughts? Okay. So I want, we went through that relatively quickly for such a dense report. So that's wonderful. Thank you all. I think what I'd like to do now is see if there are any members of the public that want to offer comments either on the work of the work group or the draft report or discussion today. And then we can talk about next steps for finalizing our report. So if any of the attendees would wish to speak or be heard right now, please raise your hand. We'll move you over to the panelist section, and you can ask a question. And Craig, you can stop sharing the report. Anyone that wishes to be heard can raise their hand. We'll move you over. Okay. So I think that in terms of next steps, we're asking work group members and members of the public if there are any additional comments, please submit to us by December 10th. What we will do then, and again, I think to the extent that there are like lines and paragraphs, if there's some small additions, if you feel like, I think that we haven't been accurate in capturing the work group's views or capturing all the dimensions of an issue, please send those edits in, work group members, and we can update that accordingly. I think we will do our best to get out, just so folks know, we have to get this into the governor's office to meet our timelines, and we love to meet our timelines here at the MIA. We have to get it into them December 17th. So my hope is that we can get that input in by December 10th, incorporate edits. To the extent edits can't be incorporated as lines, I think we can also include things in an appendix. From there, I think Katie's going to reach into the phone and grab me. I'd like to circulate an updated draft to work group members before the official submission. The timelines to do so are going to be really tight. So I think potentially we're talking about getting something to you all December 15th or 16th for a really quick review. And I think that's the only way that we can accomplish that. And I think at that time, any edits from the work group will be like, real concerns about things that weren't incorporated or in one way or another, either an appendix or in the report, inaccuracies, that kind of thing at that point. So let me pause there, see if there are any questions or feedback, see if that all makes sense. Okay. Well, let me just say, will public comments on the draft report be accepted by December 10th as well? Yes, absolutely, Marta, thank you. Go ahead, Mike.
I'd just like to say, it sounds like Katie and her team had a lot to do with putting this together, and I appreciate the time and effort. I thought it was comprehensive and exhaustive, and thank you, and I appreciate the effort.
I have to agree. I mean, when we got it yesterday, I was like, wow, Katie, I thought you were off before Thanksgiving, but it looks like you were working, so.
I agree. Really commendable work. I appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate that, guys. Thank you.
Yeah, so Katie has been amazing in doing all this work and is definitely our fearless leader in making sure this work group has run. I think every other member of the MIA team though that's on this call right now on this panelist side has also contributed quite a bit of time and information and effort. So just want to say thank you, everyone, for your work. I also want to say thank you to our work group members. These have been really great, meaty, substantive discussions around really hard issues. And I look forward to, I think there's a lot of places where we're going to continue to drill down and have some really important discussions. So thank you for your engagement and all of your work on this. I do think this will be, unless something really wild happens, this will be our last meeting of this work group. So again, I just want to express my deep appreciation for all of your time and your work and your dedication on this important topic. Any other work, any comments from work group members or any members of the team?
I just felt like you really went in deep on all the issues. So I really appreciate it. And I mentioned it before, I'm on a similar work group in Delaware. And this has been really helpful because it's so well organized. It's a different sort of work group. So there's people that aren't particularly knowledgeable because they're talking about a PIP fee schedule. So we have a lot of medical providers. So I'm using some of this information in that other work group. So it's been really helpful as well, Katie. So thank you. So I didn't get to say that to the whole work group because we were waiting to get online, but thank you again.
Thanks, everyone. So a lot more work to come here, but I think, again, this is a great start at this look, and just really appreciate everyone's time. Anything else before we adjourn? Oh, Marceline.
Oh, I was just going to say that I appreciate everybody's time and the robust conversations we've had in the work group, and look forward to seeing the final draft. Or the final, I guess.
Great. All right. Well, thank you all so much, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you.
Thanks.